Joining us now for some political analysis, CBS News senior foreign affairs and White House correspondent Margaret Brennan, and Washington Post White House reporter David Nakamura. David, let me start with you. We'll start with NFL. It's Sunday. Is this just President Trump being President Trump? What do you make of this?
Look, I mean, he picks the fights with a lot of people, but we saw he did this in his speech in Alabama, where he was purportedly down there to endorse the Senate candidate Luther Strange, but it got a great, a rise from the audience. And, what struck me is that it's one thing he picks a fight with the NFL over Colin Kaepernick, which sends a certain kind of signal. The next day, he amplifies that by attacking Steph Curry. And I was just looking at the sales of jerseys. Steph Curry is the most popular player in the NBA when it comes to sales of jerseys. So this is a player who has broad support. Colin Kaepernick is a controversial figure, but now he's sort of expanded that much broadly, and you see the sort of backlash. Now you have even the owners of the teams that have supported Trump, like Robert Kraft of the Patriots. And it's not clear what Trump's endgame is here in picking this broad a fight.
Right, and Margaret, there may not be an end game. It's the crowd went wild. The crowd sees these protests as anti-patriotic, as Mark Short articulated here. Is this just the way Donald Trump is? He could have spent some time talking about health care. He didn't. He could have talked about taxes. He did, but not in a way that sells either one of those programs. So where do you think this goes next?
Well, it's tax reform week, and that was a heck of a kickoff to it. Talk about being off message, but the president clearly thinks in some ways rhetorically this works for him, perhaps because it diverts attention from two very tough fights and his recent frustration with Capitol Hill. This may be something that resonates, but it also in some ways reopens some of those questions, concerns, and analysis of what the president actually meant back during the Charlottesville controversy. Why reopen some of those questions? Why have people compare, well, you didn't criticize Tom Brady when he said, of the Patriots, when he said he wasn't coming to the White House. Why are you targeting some of these other players for raising concerns on that end? And so it is a distraction, and it's one that's going to play in to mass culture. People who don't follow the ins and outs in healthcare and tax reform, they know who plays for the NBA and NFL, and they're going to care about this.
And David, speaking of healthcare, where does this fit? As Margaret mentioned, we're supposed to be moving into tax reform. This is now kind of in tender situation with, you've got two Republicans who said they won't support it. Susan Collins certainly felt like, sounded like she wasn't going to support it. So what happens this week, do you think?
Looks like it's going to, healthcare is like a third round that's going to go down. It really appears. And I think that's going to put all the more pressure on Republicans and this president who is really wanting a win somewhere, somehow, to make something happen. We've started to see the details now of the tax reform come out. The president has promised this is not going to be a tax cut for the rich, but we're already hearing about the top rates coming down. At the same time, they're talking about doubling the standard exemption for the middle class, which could be popular. So this is something I think that Republicans and the White House and Congress is really united on for Republican leadership. The question now is whether they can do it. And if not, whether he turns to Democrats for immigration or other things.
And you do have the White House quietly acknowledging they're not going to get to that 15% corporate tax rate that the president had campaigned on. It's going to be a bit higher, in part because they're dealing with a different mathematical set here because they didn't get health care done.
Before we move on to international affairs, Mark, what do you think is going to happen with DACA? I'm thinking about, you've got the healthcare fight, the tax fight. Those are going to be pretty partisan. Right. But a week ago, we were talking about 2 weeks in a row, the president had made deals with the Democratic leaders. One of them was on deferred action for childhood arrivals. What's happening with that deal?
We haven't heard much, to be quite honest with you. But you're exactly right, because while you hear Senator McCain talk about returning to regular order and this hope in some ways of getting bipartisanship on certain issues, that was a brief shining hope for a moment there with the president brokering this deal with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, not only with keeping the government open and funded, but the promise of getting this immigration reform done. That doesn't seem to be the signal being sent right now on health care just yet. And it's not clear on something that is this iconic in many ways to those on the left as Obamacare, whether they are willing on this particular issue to reach across the aisle and fix a system that even President Obama said needed some improvement.
So, David, on tax, quickly on tax, the Republicans will be back in line, though, because McConnell, Ryan, and the president are pretty much in the same place, right?
Right, absolutely. I think this is a chance for the White House to try to work with the leadership, provide leadership. One of the things that's been said about the healthcare debate is the White House is not providing leadership, has not sort of taken authorship of some of the key tenets of this. I think with tax reform, you're seeing more of that. Of course, as Margaret said, the president threw out this 15% corporate tax rate. We're not going to get there. There's now being floated that could be 20, but that would still be a significant reduction. I think the White House is going to move all heaven and earth to get there.
Margaret, at the United Nations this week, the president challenged the North Korean leader in pretty tough language. Was that a strategic plan or was that an audible by the president? Where does things stand with North Korea right now?
Well, it's clear that General Kelly has not succeeded in turning off cable news. While he is changing the information flow to the president was able to brand this, in his words, as sort of a rocket man on a suicide mission. That was the phrase that got repeated over and over and over. That was a takeaway from the speech. The takeaway was not the United States is open to diplomacy to settle this issue. And so the president's words did undercut the message that Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, has been trying to push here, which is we're actually not trying to take you out of power. We're actually not trying to overthrow your regime, and you shouldn't fear sitting down at the table with us. The president sent a very different or else kind of message from the podium of the United Nations, which is supposed to be an institution aimed at peace building and collective action.
And said they would totally, potentially totally destroy North Korea.
Right. That was not intended. It had been in and out of the speech, the Rocket Man reference, but the takeaway, the focus on diplomacy was definitely.
And the president also said, we're still demanding the complete denuclearization as a prerequisite for these talks, something that I think has been something the North Korean regime has made clear that they're not going to agree to ahead of any kind of talks.
Margaret, 40 seconds left. Iran, give me your thoughts about that this week.
Well, this meeting, the first time you had Iranian and high-level U.S. officials, Rex Tillerson and Nikki Haley, in the same room with Iranian officials, did not present any kind of proposal on what the president is planning to do, which is to decertify Iran's compliance with a nuclear deal. They listed their complaints, but they have not presented a pathway out. I'm told the White House is looking at how to deal with Congress and how to manage the fallout here, because Congress could reinstitute sanctions if the president follows through on that threat to decertify next month. So we have a lot of worried partners in this Iran nuclear deal who are also saying, China's one of these partners here. Are you going to break your deal with China on Iran and ask them to help you in North Korea?
All right, thanks to both of you, and we'll be back in a moment.